Well, hello, English 111 students. This is Dr. Mark Tinsley, and you're joining me in week 13 of our course, November 16th through the 22nd. Today we're going to be talking about styles of arguments. But first, let's talk about what's due this week. You need to be reading chapter 13 in the text. If you haven't done that yet, cut this off, read the chapter, come back. Chapter 13 in the textbook. And this week, your final draft of essay number 3 is due. So I hope you've been working on that. Get that in. If you turned in a rough draft, I will look at that in the first couple of days of this week and get you some feedback back. All right, so you can make any changes you need to make. If you didn't turn in a rough draft, that's fine. But I won't be able to give you any feedback if you didn't turn one in. Again, rough draft turn in is optional in this class, but final draft turn in is not. So at the end of this week, by Sunday, November 22nd, you need to turn in essay number 3. Remember, we turn it in a Microsoft Word document, .doc or .docx only, okay? You can find that upload link in Canvas under the Week 13 folder. So, this week, we're reading Chapter 13 in the textbook. We're turning in essay number 3 by Sunday, okay? I hope you are good with that. All right. Here we go. Let's talk about argument styles. Styles of arguments. Now, when we think about style, look at this picture. What is style? Now, who is this? Those of you who are rock and roll fans, especially classic rock and roll fans, will recognize this as Slash from the group Guns N' Roses. They were broken up for many, many years, but just recently, the last few years, have gotten back together and are touring again. But Slash has style. And when I typically ask my residential classes, what is the style? What gives him his style? And people say things like, well, his hat, his top hat. He's known for his leather top hat and his curly black hair, his sunglasses, the nose ring in his nose, the bracelets and the rings on his fingers. He would oftentimes wear, very grungy looking clothes. And then the Les Paul guitar, which we see there, is his classic signature guitar. And so all of these things make Slash. They're part of his style. Take away the glasses, take away the top hat, take away the Les Paul guitar, etc., and you don't have Slash anymore. What makes Slash the iconic rock and roll guitarist that he is are his elements of style. And your writing has elements of style in it as well. And we're going to talk about what some of those are today. Okay? So what are the elements of style? Well, things like your personality. Your personality comes out in your writing, right? Your personality comes out in your day-to-day interactions with people. The subject matter is part of your style. Some people write on particular subject matters. Maybe you like to write on law or literature or science. If that's typically what you write on, that's going to be part of your style. So your personality is part of your style. Your subject matter is part of your style. Your context or situation is part of your style. Maybe you're in a certain context or life situation and you're writing about that a lot. That might be part of your style. Your attitude or your emotions, the things you bring to your writing in terms of who you are and the emotions that you communicate are part of your style. And of course, your audience can be part of your style as well. In other words, who do you typically write to? Are you typically writing to people, younger people, older people, science type people, or more artsy people? I mean, who is your audience? That's part of your style. And of course, there are other style elements as well, but these are ones that I typically go over briefly in this lecture. So what are the elements of style? Here they are. These are 5 basic elements of style, and these can be elements of style that in your personal interactions and relationships face-to-face with people. This is also part of your style in writing. There are 2 general types of styles in writing. One is formal and one is informal. We've kind of talked about this before, but just by way of review, formal style is what we would term maybe academic writing. It's more refined writing, and it typically uses the third person. And that's what the type of writing I'm trying to get you to start doing in this class. So I've encouraged you not to write in first and second person, but write in third person. It's more objective, right? Be more refined. Write like an academic. That's your formal style. But we can also write in an informal style, and that's what I call loose writing style. Can be unrefined. It can use more colloquial or common language. It can use the first and second person, often does, but doesn't have to. But here's the thing, it relates to the audience much more easily. It closes that gap between writer and audience much more, much easier. And it's because it's more conversational. Okay? You might think of informal writing as conversational writing typically. So we have those two overarching styles, formal and informal. We are tending towards formal in this class, all right? So when you're writing your papers, think formal, think academic, think refined, think third person. Here's an example of a sentence written in a more formal style. John F. Kennedy's death, though tragic, is a superb example of how the loss of a popular public figure can positively affect patriotic fervor, corporate empathy, and nationalistic drive. Oh, very, very cool, right? Lots of academic words there, third person, etc., etc. Very refined, right? And a more informal sentence might be something like, I hate that JFK was killed because, to be real, his death brought our country together like nothing else could have. Notice how that uses first person. It's very conversational. It's unrefined. It's colloquial, like to be real, right? So you can see the drastic difference in the two styles, formal versus informal. And when you're writing academically, you want to choose more formal language. You want it to sound academic because you're trying to write objectively from a third person point of view. So let's talk about style and the words we use. Okay? So again, first, second persons versus third person. Again, if we're more informal, we're in first, second person. We're more formal, we're in the third person. We also, some words, we're going to talk about a lot of different types of things in this lecture, words, and then we'll get into something called tropes and here in a little bit. But words we choose. So we can choose first person versus second person versus third person, or we can choose colloquialisms. Colloquialisms are just everyday words, things that we use in our everyday speech. We say things like, she is crazy, or gotcha. When it rains, it pours. It is what it is. I mean, these are colloquialisms. These are just things that, aren't formal, but we say them a lot in our everyday speech. We want to kind of avoid these things in formal academic writing unless we're quoting someone else. But they are part of our style, right? If we even informally write like this a lot, if these are the kinds of words we use and phrases we use, then that's part of our writing style. Slang can be part of a style too. Again, we want to avoid it in academic writing, but things like the bomb and fat and dude, and students always laugh because they say, we can tell you're older because of the slang terms you put up on the board. But I know there are a lot of more current slang terms, but you know what they are. Slang is part of our style. This is how we speak in everyday speech. But again, we want to try to avoid slang in academic writing. Jargon. Jargon is when we use words that are specific to a certain discipline that only a select type of person is going to know, and other people are not going to know. For example, if I said, I was on final approach for the ILS runway 15 at XYZ airport, and I noticed I had excessive crab in the aircraft. Now that is jargon because only aviators, people who fly planes, helicopters, are going to know what I'm talking about there. I actually happen to be a pilot, so I know exactly what this means, and people who are in the flying profession would know exactly what this means. But if you don't fly or you don't know the lingo of aviation, this is going to be a very confusing sentence, especially the second half where it says you have excessive crab in the aircraft. Because a lot of people might think you have the little critters with the legs and arms that are moving around sideways in your aircraft. That's not crab. In an aircraft, crab is when you point the nose of the aircraft into the wind. So you're kind of flying sideways, which is where the term comes from. But that's jargon, and we want to avoid jargon as much as possible in any kind of writing that we're doing, informal or formal, because most people aren't going to understand it unless you're writing to a group of people who are going to know the jargon. If I'm writing to a bunch of aviators, I can probably guess that they're going to know what this all means, and I don't have to worry about it. A connotation, the tone of our writing, what our writing implies, right? So, for example, if I were to say Hillary Clinton is a leftist demagoguess whose only concern is her next political conquest, well, the tone of that is pretty cynical, isn't it? I mean, leftist demagoguess whose only concern is the next political conquest. I mean, that's not very endearing, is it? But what if I said it this way? Hillary Clinton is a successful politician who enjoys the political landscape of America. Now, that's a little more toned down, right? And it doesn't sound so negative. Remember, when you're writing academically, especially academically, you want to be balanced in your writing, and you want to keep the cynicism to a minimum. write objectively. The first sentence there, Hillary is a leftist demagoguess, is not written objectively. That's definitely from a certain political perspective. The second one could be from either left or right political perspective because it's much more balanced. Okay, so remember, the words you use are important. I had a general that I worked for in the Army once, and he used to tell us officers, he would say, hey guys, words matter. Okay, words matter, and words matter in our writing. Okay, let's talk about style and sentence structure. Length of sentences, right? Short versus long versus medium. You want to, in your style is your style, but try to develop a style that alters the sentence length. You don't want all long sentences. That's what bore people. You don't want all short sentences because that's going to make people think you're writing in bullets. You don't want all medium sentences. Vary the length of your sentences. Have some short sentences, some long sentences, some medium length sentences, so that you keep the flow going and you keep your readers interested, okay? Also, think about complexity when you're thinking about your style. This sentence here, Mr. Jones, a man of valor and intrigue, of good stock and singularity of purpose, had two life principles he lived by: courage of conviction and candor. Now, this sentence it's grammatically correct, but it's kind of confusing. It's got dashes, you got colons, you got starts and stops in the sentence. It's very complex. Now, can you write a complex sentence like this? Absolutely, but don't make too many sentences this complex, or again, you're going to bore or distract your reader. So think about complexity when you're thinking about your style. Sentence fragments: courage, strength, love, hallmarks of an American soldier. Problem is that's not a complete sentence. It's a fragment. Courage, strength, love, hallmarks. There's no verb in there. Where's the verb, right? You need the verb. I would put in here to change it: courage, strength, and love are the hallmarks of the American soldier. That would make it a complete sentence. Try to avoid sentence fragments because they're not complete and therefore should not be used. Let's talk about style and punctuation. If I'm going fast, I'm sorry. You can always stop, rewind, and play it again. Style and punctuation. Remember, periods end a thought. I like ice cream, right? And that's it. It's done. You've ended your thought. Remember, semicolons end a thought, but not as abruptly as a period. And they can point to a continuation of a thought. I like ice cream, semicolon. It makes me feel happy inside. In other words, the continuation of the thought there is it makes me feel happy inside. What does? The ice cream. So the semicolon is used there just to help me continue a thought. Why am I talking about this right now? How you use punctuation is part of your style. And I would encourage you to vary your punctuation. Use all the different punctuation. It's there as a tool. Use it. Colons usually point to something. They're like directional arrows. You know, those arrows that you see on the highway that tell you get in the left lane or get in the right lane or whatever, or the arrows on the signs tell you to exit the interstate. That's how colons are. They kind of point in the direction that the sentence wants you to go. For example, I like all kinds of ice cream. Colon, point to the right, right? Vanilla, strawberry, chocolate, or whatever. So that colon is pointing you to the different flavors of ice cream. It wants to highlight those. It wants you to really capture those different flavors. Dashes can serve a lot like a colon, or they can introduce side thoughts. So you can use a dash like this. I like all kinds of ice cream, dash, vanilla, strawberry, chocolate, or whatever. Notice that dash is operating just like the colon above it, right? It's pointing you in the direction of the flavors. This next one, though, is an example of a side thought. I like ice cream, dash, no matter the flavor, dash, because it's so good. So the side thought is no matter the flavor, right? And those dashes isolate that side thought so that the reader gets it. So the reader gets it. That's a side thought. Ellipses. Now, we don't use ellipses in formal writing unless you're using them as part of a quotation. But ellipses introduce a dramatic pause in your writing. So you can use these informally. And I would encourage you to do it as much as you like informally. Ice cream. Who doesn't like it, right? So you notice that dramatic pause. That's what the ellipses does for you, okay? It introduces dramatic pause. But again, try to avoid the ellipses in formal academic writing. Okay, let's talk about figurative language. What is figurative language as it relates to style? Figurative language illustrates concepts by using language that makes them stand out. It adds the color to your writing, it adds figures to your writing, it engages the mind's eye of the reader. It illustrates, right? That's what it does. It's like drawing on the reader's mind. There are different types of figurative language. There are tropes and schemes. Tropes, just essentially these types of figurative language change the meanings of words or phrases. Okay, they introduce changes in the meanings of words and phrases, whereas schemes change the arrangement of words in sentences. So we're going to talk about lots of these. So what are the different types of tropes? Let's talk about these. A lot of these, they're in your book, but let's go through them briefly. First we'll talk about is allusion. Allusion describes one situation by comparing it to another. For example, the meeting was John's Little Bighorn. Now, Little Bighorn was a historical event, right, where Custer made his last stand. And so this meeting was obviously not a good thing for for John, right? Because it was his last stand. He got destroyed apparently in this meeting. So that's the allusion, right? We're describing the meeting by comparing it to Little Bighorn. Same thing here. The place is a dumpster fire when it comes to its day-to-day operations. This place is not obviously a great place to work because dumpster fires are out of control, aren't they? If you've ever seen a dumpster fire, they get hot and out of control fast, and they can burn up a whole block because dumpsters are near buildings usually, right? So the fire gets in the dumpster, gets hot, it burns the building catches on fire. You get the point. So allusions, describing one situation by comparing it to another. Analogy is comparing two things to show the similarities and or to make a point or further an argument or whatever. For example, driving a semi-truck and being an accountant are not too dissimilar. Both involve keeping ledgers, both require a lot of sitting, and both can be extremely boring at times. Do you notice how I'm comparing two things, driving a truck and being an accountant? And for whatever reason, I don't have the full context of the sentence, right? But for whatever reason, I'm comparing those two things. And so I'm using an analogy. I'm saying that driving the truck, this is a lot like being an accountant, and here are the reasons why. Antonomasia, all right, substituting a descriptive word or phrase for a proper name. And for example, Reagan was called the Great Communicator. Ronald Reagan, the president back in the 80s, was called the Great Communicator. That was his name, right? So when people said the Great Communicator, we knew they were talking about Ronald Reagan. Elvis was called the King of Rock and Roll. If you say even today, who's the King of Rock and Roll? Most everybody's going to say Elvis, because we've substituted a descriptive word, phrase, for the person's proper name. That's antonomasia. Hyperbole is exaggeration for effect. For example, the only way to take care of the Korean nuclear threat is to wipe them from the face of the planet. Well, most people who would say something like this, I hope you don't say anything like this, but most people who would say something like this don't really mean we need to wipe North Koreans off the face of the planet. What they're saying, though, is we've got to take a strong military stance towards them. But this is hyperbole, right? We're saying the only way is to wipe them from the face of the earth. Well, that's exaggeration for effect, as is he's the smartest person in the world. I don't know that I've ever met the smartest person in the world. So when I've said this about someone else, I'm just being hyperbolic, right? I'm exaggerating for effect. That's a trope. As is irony, writing that presents tension or is intended to be the opposite of the literal meaning. For example, Donald Trump is running the White House as he would The Apprentice, the show he used to run. This has been an effective means of management, as seen by his high turnover rates. That's an ironic statement because high turnover rates typically demonstrate that someone is an ineffective leader, right? So the person who wrote this is saying, listen, they're really saying his high turnover rates show him to be ineffective, but they're using irony to bring that point out. Another example. If results are the measure of success, then Hitler was one of the most successful leaders in the 20th century. Now, no one in their right mind thinks that Adolf Hitler was an effective leader or a successful leader. So the person who's saying this is using irony, saying that what they're really saying is results are not the measure of success. Because if they were, people like Hitler would be successful. And we know people like Hitler are not successful. Therefore, results are not the measure of success, the ultimate measure of success, right? Do you get it? That's irony. That's a trope. We all know these two tropes, right? Metaphors and similes. Metaphors compare things without using like or as. He's the rock of our organization. Sarah's report was a maze. I could not understand it. So Sarah and the maze are being compared there. This man, whoever he is being compared to the rock, to a rock. But no like or as is used there, so that's a metaphor. Similes use like or as. Compare using like or as. Jose is as stubborn as a mule, or Anastasia is like a train, on track, on time, and speedy. Metonymy. Metonymy is a trope where we use objects to represent particular concepts. For example, the old saying, the pen is mightier than the sword, or it's raining cats and dogs outside. These are examples of metonymy, as is when we say things like Xerox machine, which I don't hear much anymore. But when I was a kid, we would say Xerox machine. We meant the copy machine because Xerox was the company that made copy machines. Now, lots of companies make copy machines, but a lot of people, you'll still hear people say Xerox machines or Washington. When people say Washington, they oftentimes mean the national government of our country, right? Or Big Brother. Big Brother is like NSA, CIA, or banks. Well, they're not referring to they're just referring to the banking industry, the financial industry of our country. So these are all examples of metonymy. Oxymorons, or paradox or contradiction. For example, I wrote something one time called a bright shining twilight. Well, twilight is not bright and shining, so I'm using oxymoron there. As the old joke about parkways versus driveways, you drive on a parkway and you park in a driveway. That's examples of oxymoron. Rhetorical questions are tropes, right? Questions that are more statements than questions, or questions that don't really require an answer. For example, what do you think of that? A lot of times you'll hear people say, what do you think of that? And what they really mean is, isn't that cool, right? Or do you see what I'm saying? They're not really asking you to tell them what they're saying. They're just saying, you see it, right? I mean, you're good with it. I know you do. Or can you think of anything more convincing? What the person's really saying is, this is really convincing, right? So you get the idea. Those are rhetorical questions. Signifying is another type of trope. When a writer takes jabs at another, usually for humorous effect. For example, you stink, said Fred. Yeah, Courtney responded, maybe, but you're an idiot and I can take a shower. That would be an example of signifying, as would Abbott and Costello's famous Who's on First sketch. Hey, if you have never seen Who's on First from Abbott and Costello, stop right now, go on YouTube, search Who's on First, Abbott and Costello. It's hilarious. But those are all examples of signifying. Understatement is another type of trope, when you underrepresent something of significance in order to make a point. For example, Vietnam was a little war the U.S. fought during the 1960s and 1970s. The Vietnam War was 16 years old. 50-some thousand soldiers lost their lives. It was not a little war. So someone who would write this statement is using understatement to make a point. Einstein was a pretty smart dude. Well, Einstein was one of the geniuses of world history. So Einstein was not pretty smart. He was absolutely a genius. So again, an example of understatement. Okay, so we're done with tropes. Let's move on to schemes, right? When we change word order. Anaphora is a way to do this. And anaphora is an example of repetition. So we're using repetition in our speech. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech is a beautiful example of repetition. If you've never heard that, stop this recording, go again to YouTube, and type in I Have a Dream speech, Martin Luther King Jr., and you will be amazed. He says, I have a dream over and over and over and over again. That is an example of anaphora, and he does it for effect. If I were to say something like this, there's no limit to what you can do. There's no limit to what your friends can do. There's no limit to what your family can do. That phrase, there is no limit, said over and over again, is an example of anaphora. And again, Martin Luther King Jr. does this in the I Have a Dream speech. Antithesis is a scheme as well. It's parallelism that highlights contrast. For example, you may think you're right, but you are really wrong. You may think, but you are really. These are parallel. This is parallelism. It's parallelism. It's an example of antithesis, right? Which is parallelism that highlights contrast. We call those who stand up for their conviction strong. We call those who buckle under pressure weak. Contrasting things using the we call those phrase. Inverted word order can be effective if used strategically. Into the sunset rode the cowboy and his sidekick. typically you would say the cowboy and the sidekick rode into the sunset, but we've reversed the word order for effect. Or the old Yoda speech, right? Teach him I cannot, too old is he. Okay, we don't use inverted word order very much, but if you have an opportunity to do it for effect, it is a style technique. Parallelism, using similar words or phrases for effect. It was here, it was there, it was everywhere. Right? So this is sort of like what we talked about before, right? Anaphora, but it's a little bit different. We're usually shorter phrases, or maybe one word, that type of thing. But we're doing it for effect. It was here, it was there, it was everywhere. When we suffer, we build character. When we build character, we enhance our ability to handle life's issues. When we enhance our ability to handle life's issues, we create resiliency. Notice how each sentence builds on the next one. That's an example of parallelism, using words and phrases for effect. All right. So, tropes and schemes, styles of argument, style technique. We went through a lot of things in the last 26 minutes. I went through it quickly. Read your book. Go back and watch this recording a couple times, since we only took about, 25, 26, 27 minutes to do this today. You shouldn't have any problem reviewing it. If you have any questions, let me know. I am here for you, and I want to help you in any way that I can. But again, what do you need to do this week? Listen to this lecture, read chapter 13 in the textbook, turn in the final draft of essay number 3 in Word, Microsoft Word .doc or .docx to Canvas. And there is an upload link in the week 13 folder. All right, I hope you're having a great week so far. I hope you have a great week. If you need me for anything, let me know. Have a great week.